Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm very excited to have today as my guest, Heather Nichols. She has been a therapist, a coach, a facilitator, author, speaker, and creator for over 3 decades. She was a somatic psychotherapist and movement facilitator for many years, and she specialized in working with trauma. She discovered Access Consciousness about 13 years ago and found that these powerful tools completely transformed all areas of her own life, and she now facilitates sessions and classes in a variety of areas, including business, bodies, and helping people acknowledge how their difference is actually a capacity and not a disability. I'm really excited to talk about that. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And I always like to start off the show by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about their story and how they came to be doing the work that they're doing. So we'd love to find out a little bit more about you.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, it's been a long, wonderful, winding path. I would say the biggest thing for me, like the biggest piece of all of it that's always been like present for me is my body. And I started dancing when I was 2. I never stopped. I did ballet for 16 years. I was a gymnast, a diver in high school. So just a lot of body stuff, and then I became a social worker. I got a master's in social work. And I discovered, I was living in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I live now. And I discovered that there was a way to put those worlds together. And it was called somatic psychotherapy, body-centered psychotherapy, and dance therapy. And I started teaching a movement modality that was kind of therapeutic and, just like facilitated our evolution and awareness of bodies, and was also practicing as a somatic psychotherapist, and I did a really specific training that taught me a lot about working with trauma in the body and through the body. And that was really amazing to see the changes that, were showing up with people when we really included the body. And so I did that for a long time, and then discovered Access Consciousness, and saw that there was like an even easier way to facilitate change, and just kind of started going in that direction. And along the way, discovered that business was really fun for me. So I started facilitating stuff around business, and now for me, it's like it all goes together. Like when we're resourced in our bodies, we're happy in our bodies, we can be really dynamic creators. We can, celebrate the difference that we are in the world, and use that to fuel everything. So it's all just a big playground.
Yeah. Yes. And I love that you look at it from that perspective of play, because I think a lot of people, especially our clients, tend to see things through the lens of problems. Like my body is a problem, or my business is not performing the way I want it to, and that's a problem. And I'm curious, what your take on that is, because if we call it a problem, what does that then end up creating for us?
Right. Well, I mean, one of the big tenets of Access Consciousness is that your point of view creates your reality. And that's one of those things that for me, it's like, I feel like we can't kind of like stress that enough. Like it's something that becomes more obvious and clear to me all the time, is wow, even like these tiny little subtle points of view that I have, like determine how the world shows up, how people in my life show up. And so it's one of those, like, for me, it's like something that I just continue to get more and more all the time. And if you do have the point of view of problem, you're going to keep having more problems. And it's really weird, actually, to live without problems. I, like, even recently, I like, we were both at a class in Costa Rica last week. I came home and I was like, oh, I kind of found myself like orienting toward looking for problems in this very subtle way. And I was like, they're not there. Like, there's nothing there, and it's like, it's strange to be in a world that is so problem centric when that's not your point of view.
Yeah. Well, even for me, like right in this moment, I have this little kitty cat.
I know, I love it.
Who's running around trying to like shake the camera and knocking things over. And I'm like, oh my God, he's meowing in the background. Oh, what a problem. He's going to mess up my podcast. And, he's just being himself, right? He's having a bit of a hard time. His body's going through some changes. And I'm having to practice exactly what you're talking about. Like, oh my God, what's wrong with my cat? What do I need to do to fix my cat? And what if instead I could just allow him, trust that he's going through whatever he's going through. If he needs, I've taken him to the vet, we've checked him out, all the things. It's something different, he's going through an energetic change. I'm going through an energetic change. We just came back from a really intense workshop. And so what if it's not a problem? And what if it's okay that he's meowing and running around and kind of hyper and a little needy and all of that? I'm always having to practice this idea of allowance, like allowing him to be who and what he is without seeing it as a problem.
That's funny. My son just called me. I did put it on do not disturb, but he's allowed past the do not disturb. So yeah, life, life is life. And I love Steve Bowman, who is he's just a brilliant creator, brilliant guy. He's written some cool books. He says, a problem is just a point of view. A problem is just a possibility with a point of view attached.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite ways to look at things, because it's like, it's like, what if your cat is just would really like to contribute to this conversation, or like my son, calling is like adding his energy, and we're not trained to think of things in that way, but it's like, if you drop the point of view and you're like, I wonder if this is a possibility.
Yeah.
You start to ask questions, that opens up a different space.
Well, we talk about in Access, right? How a question empowers, a question opens up possibilities, and so when we are looking at something through the lens of problem, we can ask, what's the possibility here? Or maybe what's right about this? For those of us that have a tendency to go to the wrongness of things, like what's right about this that I'm not getting, right? With my cat being the way that he is right now. What's right about me that I'm not getting when we're being really hard on ourselves or judging ourselves. And I love the power of the question, and I'm sure you use it a ton in your work with clients.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I mean, because when you're curious about something, you're just inviting new awareness and new possibilities. And so it's so powerful to, like, if I look at like working, like doing a session with somebody or whatever, and they come and they're like, I'm freaking out, I'm having anxiety, I'm stressing out, whatever's going on. I have a problem with my partner or my child or whatever. And to be the space with somebody of, like, I wonder what's right about this. I wonder what's right about you. I wonder what's right about this. If this wasn't a problem, what would the possibility be here? Like, all those questions. It's like, to be that space with somebody and, with each other. It's such a gift, because it just like takes you out of the like PTSD universe of problem solution reality that so many of us think is so real and inescapable. But it is just a construct.
Yes. I want to come back to this other idea of working with bodies and how, as we're talking about questions and change, right? One of the questions we sometimes ask clients is when they're dealing with an issue, a problem, is this the change I've been asking for? And a lot of times, change happens more on the physical level than really on the mental or emotional level. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about change and bodies and how do you facilitate that with clients, and especially shifting that point of view of my body is having a problem, this thing hurts or this thing isn't working right.
Yeah, I love that question. Well, our bodies are sensory organisms, like they are sensate organisms that, and I would encourage, anybody for whom this is interesting, like, what if you saw your body more like an animal, like that beautiful kitty cat, if you saw your body more like an animal and less like whatever you think it is, less like a problem. And because our bodies they have their own unique awareness. They have their own consciousness, and they actually have a lot of wisdom, and they communicate a lot of things with us. And one of the ways in which bodies communicate is through sensation. And so, like when I was a therapist, we used to talk about sensation being like the language of the body. So it's a very dynamic way that our bodies get our attention, and we can all see that through pain, right? Pain is a very easy, immediate way for our bodies to get our attention. And then there's, we could do a whole, we could do many days on that, but beyond that, there's all this other possibility of like other sensations that aren't painful that also, get our attention and give us information. But if we look at pain, it's like, I don't know why this is, sorry. If we look at pain, and we look at okay, so if your body is having pain now, one of the things that people do is they go, okay, what's the problem here that I need to solve? And I never look at my body that way anymore, ever. Like I just always go, hey body, what are you showing me? What are you telling me? What are you communicating with me? And I always have the point of view that my body is showing me something that could be greater about it and about my life and about, everything that I'm doing. I include my body a lot in my business and, like making choices about things and, different things that I do. And so pain has been, for me, it's been such a gift. In my body going like, hey, it could be easier, like I'm just using this to get your attention, but it really could be easier, and what if you explored this? What if you explored this? And there's so many different, things we can add to our lives to make our bodies and our lives easier, and it's like, I feel like my body is kind of like, a lot of times it's almost kind of like out ahead of me going like, hey, look over here, and then I go, oh, wow, that's actually something I've been asking about for my business, but my body is showing me, a different possibility over here, So, but you can't receive from anything that you judge. So if you judge pain as a problem and wrong, or your body as a problem and wrong, that's it. That's the end of the road.
Yeah. I work with a lot of healers, and I also work a lot with people with addictions, especially drug and alcohol addictions. And I see with the folks with addiction, a lot of them, the reason they're using chemicals and stuff is to kind of numb their awareness, to numb the sensations that their body is giving them. And so I wonder, if you had a client like that coming to you, where would you start? Like, where would you start with teaching them that it's actually like okay to feel sensations in your body?
Yeah. Well, lots of places, I guess. I mean, I would start by just, being with that person and seeing, what was, yeah, like asking some questions and I think one of the things that we're not actually educated about is awareness. And so many seekers and healers and people who actually a lot of people who tend toward addiction um, are very different people. They function in a really different way. And they have a lot of energetic awareness of the world that nobody ever talks to you about, and so it's like, when you're a child and you're aware of all these things and nobody's talking about it, and I remember being a kid myself and like always being aware of the lies that were unspoken, always being aware of the energetic, what was going on energetically, and it didn't match what was going on the surface, and when you're a child and that there's this discrepancy between what you're aware of and what you're seeing and what everybody's telling you, and you're trained to reference the adults in your life for them to teach you what's about reality, um, and nobody's acknowledging the unspoken stuff. The first thing you're going to do is make yourself wrong, and go to, I am deficient, I don't get this, and I remember just being like, I don't understand how the world works. I need to so I would use my awareness, which was huge, and I would use my intelligence, because a lot of people also who are seekers, healers, addicts are incredibly smart and have a lot of capacities, and so we use those capacities to study this reality, and study all the lies and somehow figure out a way to make it fit in your world, and how to handle those discrepancies. And so we give up all these parts of ourselves and we make, these lies, we make that, real. And so I think to start to see, wow, like all the places where we've done that, and what happens with addiction is a lot of times people, people just, they really need a way. There's so much energetic awareness going on. There's so much that they're seeing that nobody else is speaking to or acknowledging. And it's like, instead of they're going to just continually make themselves crazy,
Mhm.
unless they numb out the awareness.
Yeah.
And, substances are a great way to do that. Or, any sort of repetitive behaviors. It doesn't have to be a substance. It could be exercise, somebody could be addicted to exercise, there's lots of different things like that.
Yeah, I can really resonate with what you're saying as a former head tripper myself. I mean, that's what I did. I was recognized early on as a smart kid. I did well in school, so I really pursued that. And I remember being an undergrad and learning about psychology, and why I was so drawn to it is because I was trying to understand people. I was trying to understand, why do people do the crazy things that they do? Why do people hurt other people the way that they do? And I thought that using my intellect and my mind would be the way to do that. And then my life took this such a dramatic turn, after college, when I got really, really sick. And for the first time, I had to actually pay attention to my body. I didn't even know I had a body from the neck down. I was so out of touch with it. And I went through this long, almost 20-year thing with Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's when I had to learn about all that energetic awareness that I had been having my whole life, but basically it just been storing in my body. I had early life traumas, and I was a healer, and I was trying to heal other people, my parents, my friends, everyone that I cared about. I was trying to take in their pain and suffering. and heal it for them. And what it did was it made me sick, it made my body start to break down and all these things. So in that process, I was able to learn how that I have this gift that my body is to give me awareness. And now I know how to use it to give me information about working with clients. Now my body tells me about what's going on with someone, and I don't just intellectualize it. And it's such a easier way to work with folks. So
Totally.
yeah. And I wanted to say something too, coming back to trauma and bodies. I think there's also a misperception in our reality that when something traumatic occurs, you should just get over it. It's in the past, move on. But that discounts the body's role in it. That the reality is we do hold trauma in our bodies. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean that was my work for 13 years, and it still informs a lot of what I do. And trauma is it is both what we think of as trauma, like life events, life experiences that are threatening, perceived as threatening, to the body and to our world, and then also I would say, just even living in a world that doesn't validate and acknowledge you as an energetic being with awareness, that's traumatic just in and of itself, so there's some degree of that for everybody who has any sort of sensitivity or awareness. It can be traumatizing being in the world, so and one of the things that happens with trauma is, we have this amazing, our bodies are just incredible, and we have these different aspects of our nervous system, but the autonomic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that is responsible for fight, flight, freeze. Sorry. And in a traumatic event, the nervous system does its thing. And if you see your body as like an animal, you can kind of have a different understanding of this. Whereas like there's an instinct, right, to get away from the traumatic threat or event. And when we do that successfully and we navigate it successfully, there's also a part of the nervous system that's responsible for bringing us back to resting and relaxation. But what happens in a traumatic event when we don't get to when there isn't a sort of positive resolution to it, is that we get stuck in traumatic activation. So our neurology actually gets stuck in the in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that's only designed to be a very temporary, momentary thing in our neurology. But most people, because of all the repeated traumatic experiences or just experience of being in the world, we live there, and so it's a big part of, I think, what creates the world as it is in this moment. So many people are walking around with this neurological activation as if they're constantly, and that also goes back to like the problem thing, constantly looking for a problem, because that's part of that neurological, looking for. So one of the things that I used to do a lot, and I still do when when it's appropriate, is actually help people kind of revisit those experiences in a way that's a lot more resourced, like helping them stay really present with their bodies and go back to those moments where these things were put in place and bring the neurology back down to resting, so that the body actually, like the Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. He actually was, the people that trained me in the late 90s actually were the first people that introduced him to body-centered work. And unfortunately, he doesn't really give them, from what I've seen, he doesn't give them much credit for it. but when I was in my training, I remember that one of my main trainers was going to work with him, and she was just rocking his world because he had never considered the body. He's a very well known psychiatrist, and so this idea that the body keeps the score is like it does, and so we can undo that in a lot of ways. We can undo it through different types of processes, but and access consciousness bars, access consciousness body processes. There's lots of different ways to work with that, but it all involves coming into greater presence with the body. And that's one of the things that can be terrifying for people, because their body is this sort of battleground, and they're like, I can't even, so I'm going to do drugs. I'm going to do, whatever. And that's also the beauty of like being with somebody and being like, hey, I got it. I gotcha. It's okay. We can do this,
Well, I find that's especially true when people have had early like childhood trauma, especially if it involved bodies like physical abuse or sexual abuse or something like that. You know, most people don't want to stay present for something like that, so they dissociate, right? They check out of their bodies, and they come to believe that it's not safe to be in my body. Like if I'm in my body, bad things happen and painful things happen. So I'm just going to like be out here. So I'm with you on that. Like just teaching people how to be present, how to be with their body, how to be in their body, and that it can be safe. Like that touch can be safe, or being, more present with the body can be safe. That's like often where we have to start, I think.
Absolutely. And, dissociation is so adaptive. It actually is like, a lot of people make it really wrong, but in the moment, it's an amazing adaptive capacity that we have to be able to handle what's going on. And the beauty of working with it later on, when you're in a safe environment, is that you can, revisit that and go, cool, now we're going to resource you in a different way. Like you're safe now, and so now we can, kind of take that apart, so you don't have to be stuck there,
Right.
and that's just, it's amazing how, the neuroplasticity is a big buzzword these days, and that is a part of really cultivating neuroplasticity is to have this sense of like flexibility of the nervous system and flexibility of our energetic reality, that allows you to, access a lot of different ways of being, and whatever's going to really contribute to you in that moment. And the more we do the unwinding, work, whatever that looks like, the more we have access to that. The more you have access to all of you, which is really incredible.
Well, and that's what happens with trauma, right? Is we cut off parts and pieces of ourselves, right? Like a lot of people, because they have now come to develop this point of view that it's not safe. It's not safe to feel good. It's not safe to be happy, because sometimes they were traumatized during a moment when they were really being fully themselves and being joyful and happy. And maybe somebody didn't like that and, did something to them. So they learned it's not safe to even feel good or happy or whatever. So yeah, like also it's so important not only to create that presence and safety, but to start to undo the belief systems, the points of view around I can't be me. Or to even realize that you've cut off, those parts and pieces of yourself, and how do we bring those back in a way that feels safe to the person. So that feels like a lot of the work that we need to do with trauma.
Absolutely. And it goes so deep. And I remember when I started my training as a trauma therapist, I was like, I don't have trauma, because I actually didn't, I didn't have like any events in my childhood that were classically considered to be traumatic.
Right.
And then, but like really being present with what my body was telling me, what my body was showing me, and how that was showing up in my life, it was like, whoa, okay, there is trauma here. I can't necessarily trace it to like a specific event, but it was even like my birth, like my birth was traumatic for me,
Mhm.
not because of like it nobody else would have said that, looking from the outside, which is why we also invalidate because we're like, oh, I'm just being too sensitive. But I did so much unwinding of so many things that I never would have thought were traumatic, and my whole life changed as a result. It's so incredible.
Oh, I had an experience once in an energy psychology workshop where we were going back to our birth experience, and I same thing, didn't really know that there was any particular trauma of that process other than my mom was in labor for like 24 hours. But what happened was, in as we were being guided through this kind of meditative process, I started feeling the toxicity. I started getting nauseous and feeling the toxicity of the anesthesia that they gave her, the whatever, for pain.
The
And
epidural, yeah.
the epidural, right. And like
Yeah.
I could feel that it felt like poison to me, and I had never even considered something like that. That's such a normal part of childbirth in the Western world.
Yeah.
But the impact of that, here I was like 30 years later, that chemical like imprinting was still with me in my body. And my body had experienced that as a trauma. And I had no idea.
Yeah, it's our bodies. And it's so, this is just like fascinates me to no end because our bodies give us this information. And if we don't identify anything as a problem and we're like, okay, so what do you got now, body? Like my body has just recently taken me on this whole amazing journey of like, I've been doing all this cleansing, and it's been just like really cool what it's been unwinding and changing, and it's like it's just been I've learned time and time and time again to just really trust my body and lean in when it
Mhm.
seems like something's going wrong, to be like, what is this, which is one of the greatest questions you can ask,
Yeah.
from curiosity, what is this?
Mhm. Yeah. And another
And then
great
wait.
one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just and then wait and let the awareness come. Don't look for an answer, but let
Yeah.
your body just show you. And it may not be right then. It
Right.
might be next week, next month.
Well, and I think another great question, I often will do the same. I'll start with what is this or what do I do with it? Those kinds of questions, but also, is this mine? Like, who does this
Yeah.
belong to? Like, we haven't talked so much about this, but that's such a huge tool in access consciousness and such a gift, is to
Yeah.
recognize when you're a highly sensitive person. And I want to talk about that too. When you're a highly sensitive person, you are constantly picking up on the thoughts, emotions, even the physical, what's going on in other people's bodies.
Yeah.
And if you don't acknowledge that it's not all yours, you're going to be left feeling overwhelmed with all of that information, that energetic awareness that you now your mind is going to create some story about, like, I have all these problems, there's all these things wrong with me, when all it is that you're just highly attuned to what's happening with others, and including your animals.
Right. Totally. Yeah. It's funny, speaking of birth, because I didn't know this until recently. I was chatting with my mom, and she was so anxious, uh, before I was born, because she really wanted a girl.
Mhm.
And this was before you could find out. And so I was really aware of that, like, anxiety, or like like that desire, but it had this kind of anxiety. And I was really aware of it in utero. It wasn't mine, it was my mom's. And it turns out it was like, so I took on the energy of it as anxiety, you
Yeah.
know. Well, turns out, 50 some odd years later, I find out, oh, because she wanted a girl. And I was a girl. I am a girl,
Yeah.
And so it's hilarious in a way, like, because the body can be so literal. But it's
Mhm.
like all I perceived was like anxiety, and it wasn't mine. But I took on the blueprint of that,
Yes.
and I lived with it. I created my body around it, and I created that as my world. And then, found out like a lot later, oh, it's because she wanted a girl. That's
Right.
hilarious.
Well, and here's the thing, Heather, if you had gone into, the Western psychiatric world and gone to a doctor, let's say, with, or a mental health professional trained in, the traditional methods, you would have been told you might have like generalized anxiety disorder, and here's a pill that you need to take to basically deal with that anxiety that was never yours to begin with and isn't even a problem, was just your awareness of what your mom was going through. And I think this is the trap that so many people get caught in, and why even I'm doing this podcast is to help educate our fellow professionals around these other perspectives. Like maybe there's not a chemical imbalance happening. Maybe there's not this label, this disease state, that we say people have, that by the way is incurable, and the best that you're going to do is be able to manage it. That's the paradigm.
Right.
I really, I think it's so important for us to be having these conversations. And another thing that's I'm going to shift gears slightly here, and another buzzword that's come up lately that actually I find encouraging is this term neurodivergent.
Yeah.
What we used to refer to as, some people in our field still do, what we used to refer to as learning disabilities,
Yeah.
or autism, or Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder, um,
Mhm.
obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, ADD, attention deficit disorder, all these disorders. There's a whole movement now to start looking at these things through a different lens, like neurodivergence. What if this is about people's brains, neurologies, bodies, whatever it is, being different? And what if it's not a pathology? Can you
Yeah.
talk to us about that?
Oh man, that excites me so much. I mean, when I was getting my master's, I it was 1997, and I was like, I am not even taking the class in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I was like, that's for those who aren't familiar, that's like the Bible that therapists use to, you learn the criteria for diagnosing different disorders. And I was like, no, I'm not even going to learn about that because I have no interest in working that way with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, nope, I would much rather look at the strengths and the uniqueness of people. And here we are, whatever it is, 30 years later or whatever, and it's like this is becoming more of a thing. And it's amazing to me. I mean, it's kind of baffling that, because what the DSM does is it just like streamlines everybody, and it's kind of like, here's the zone of mental health, what's considered health. And it's very, very small, and if you don't fit into this, zone, then you have a disorder, and now from this neurodivergence perspective, it's like a neurodiversity. It's like, the acknowledgement that every being walking on this planet is different. They're going to function in different ways. They do function in different ways. And I mean, I love exploring like business from the perspective of, ADHD, OCD, autism, like, because I have traits of, I have like aspects of all of those, and I don't focus well. And I love doing a lot of different things. And I am extraordinarily OCD about certain things. And I have a lot of autistic awareness, meaning like my brain does not do linearity. It's way more spherical. And time doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. It's not, I don't function from time, so but when you look at all of those things, and you start to, you take off the labels and you actually look from the perspective of, is this like this, what is the capacity here? What is the uniqueness? What is the ability? There's just so many there's so many things that become, start to become available. I was just listening to a book last night where I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was something about how like, he was saying how dyslexic entrepreneurs, it was a book about, I think it was called Business Brilliant or something like that. And he's talking about how dyslexic entrepreneurs, tend to be like, or like some of the most successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic because they developed this ability at an early age to like outsource, like they don't have the capacity to like do the linearity and function, like read and write. And so they had to have other people. It was an adaptive thing to develop this capacity to have other people doing things for you that you didn't have, that you just weren't able to, these people weren't able to do with dyslexia. And that's actually a characteristic of very successful entrepreneurs, is that they don't do everything themselves. They don't do much themselves. They really just stick to what's their brilliance is, and they get other people to do other things. And I just thought that was so fascinating. It was like, yep, that's right up my alley, that if you have dyslexia, what is the gift of it? If you
Yeah.
can't do all of those linear tasks, but you can surround yourself with people who are really good at that,
Right. Right. And it's really hard to be, and you've done this, I'm sure, at some stage in your business. I have too, when you've been a solopreneur and you're trying to do everything on your own, and you're not brilliant at all the things. And and it just seems like a lot more work, and at times it can feel overwhelming. So for me, yeah, in growing my business, it's been huge to have other people that are brilliant at what they do that I'm not so brilliant at doing those things for my business, and I can focus on what I love to do, which is really more the facilitation, the educating, doing the podcast, all the things. Like, I can't deal with the back end of what happens after we record this, but
Exactly.
I love that we're having the conversation, and that I'm able to have people, do the, putting it all together. So and
Yeah.
I think Einstein may have been dyslexic as well. I think I
Yeah.
remember hearing that. And then that brings me to this wonderful book that came from some people in Access Consciousness. Anne Maxwell, who also was a fellow social worker with you there in Colorado, and Gary Douglas and Dane Here, who are the co-creators of Access. They wrote this brilliant book that talks about this concept called "Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree?" which is an Einstein quote. So can you tell us more about kind of the Access Consciousness perspective on neurodivergence and this concept of X-Men?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's right along the lines of what we've been talking about. I That's one of my specialty areas that I facilitate in Access Consciousness, is the X-Men classes. And one of so here's a really like, I would say, sort of basic and also like life-changing tool, that to me is like the foundation of the X-Men work, is um, taking everything and literally flipping it on its head. So,
Mhm.
like the question, what's right about me, I'm not getting. What's right about this, I'm not getting. So if everything that you think is wrong about you was actually your brilliance, you know, and you just have to flip it, and the way that you do that is by asking a question, and starting to get curious. Okay, so if I think I'm really messed up in terms of, like, if I really don't, this has been one for me where I'm like, I suck with money, um well, that's been what people have told me, because I don't function like everybody else does with money. I'm actually really brilliant with money, but in my way, and it's taken me a long time to get there. But what I started to do was look at, okay, here's the judgment. I suck with money. There's no question there, right? So now I'm going to go, okay, now I wonder what actually is right about me with money that I am not getting. I wonder what's right about how I am with money, and what's different about it that's unique to me. What are my unique capacities that are seen as wrong by the rest of the world because I don't fit into any paradigm, And then,
Right.
and starting to like just being in question with that, and like letting go of the judgments of it and being in the curiosity of what the brilliance is. It's like it does eventually flip it on its head. And now I'm like, wow, like the way that I am with money, there's a lot of magic, there's a lot of capacity, like, but it doesn't, like, my dad would never say that I was good with money, because I don't do it the way that he does, but I'm
Right.
not him, you know. So
Well, and like X-Men kids, right? Oftentimes in school struggle because they're kind of being forced, right, into this traditional education paradigm, which,
that
is
doesn't
like,
work for anybody.
no, it's like 200 years old, like from Little House on the Prairie times where you like sat there, at a desk all day, just, passively sit still, and you're supposed to be absorbing all this information that's coming at you. Like, even
Mhm.
I can't learn that way. Like, even now, I go to workshops and stuff, I have to be on my phone, I have to be doodling, I have to be doing
Yeah,
lots of different things for me to be, or better yet, engaging, like in a conversation where I'm participating in the learning, not just stuff is coming at me. That never worked for me in school. That made things
yeah,
really hard.
yeah, for sure. And including our bodies too, like that's a big one for me, is like if I'm moving my body, I receive information so much more, with so much more ease and more dynamically, because I do have ADHD tendencies, and I don't like sitting. I'm like, I'm always like, who invented chairs? I don't understand. Like right now I'm sitting on a yoga bolster on the floor, I'm like, I'm like, I don't get chairs, it's not my
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So I want to be moving. I want to be, I want to be using my body, and that is a huge resource for me. Because it allows like all of that information to come in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And, schools are just not designed to accommodate that, unfortunately. And, there's some changes happening, but school is very, very archaic. It's just
It is.
it's so outdated.
There are some, I think if you look in some of the, maybe Montessori, Waldorf, there's some kind of schools that I think that do have a better understanding in it and do get the kids more physically active. I saw a video where they were letting kids sit on bouncy balls instead of chairs at desks, and like they time sped it up. So all the kids are like, you can see them just all bouncing around and moving around. Like, they have all that energy, God, I remember
Yeah.
being in school and you're sitting for so many hours, and then recess would come and it was like a madhouse. All these kids were like screaming and running around, and it was mayhem on the playground because they had all this pent up energy that they were not allowed to express or use
Yeah.
as part of their learning. And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
would love to see more change happening in that arena. This has been such a rich conversation, Heather.
Oh,
It's
I
really
know.
it's been
Really
so
great.
cool chatting with you.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about you, your work, where can they go?
Easy. HeatherNichols.com is my website. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff there. I have a YouTube channel. I post videos twice a week, and I think if you just search Heather K. Nichols, it's there. And I also just actually started a new podcast. It's called The Entrepreneurial Biome. And it's about nurturing the ecosystem of business, body, and living. So really looking at like the ecosystem and the biome of your whole life and living, and including your body and your difference and your uniqueness, and how you want to create and what you want to create. So that's new. That's on my website. It's on my YouTube channel as well. So
Awesome. That sounds fascinating. Yeah, I
yeah.
definitely want to check that out. And thank you for just sharing just your uniqueness, your difference, your vulnerability in this conversation. I think we've just offered so much information to people. So I'm just super grateful for this chat we've had today.
Me too. Thank you so much for inviting me, and for you. It's been really cool.
Awesome. And thank you all, audience, listeners, viewers. If you want to find out more about Heather, please go to her website. You can also find out more about my work at my websites, firebird-healing.com and adrianapopescu.org. Heather and I are both all over all the social media. We're in the 21st century. We're everywhere. You can find us. And feel free to reach out to either one of us if you want to learn more about how you can work with us or workshops we may have. We're both creating a lot and putting a lot out there. And of course, we talked a lot about Access Consciousness. You can check out the website, accessconsciousness.com, and they have a ton of information on YouTube and all the social media platforms. So there's plenty out there for you to explore if you want to find out more. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.